Hi there, and a very warm welcome to this week's video. I would consider this to be a rather low effort one, but through this it has the chance to be a quick tip again. So one of the maybe first quick tips that I ever do. Now, why is it low effort, or why do I say that? Basically, I was ill during last week, so I didn't have any time to prepare anything. So what we're going to look at is 2024, Cinema 4D 2024 came out, and there's a particle system in there, a new one. So we are going to take a look how to render particles with this new particle system inside of Octane. So without further ado, let's grab your coffee and let's keep going. So let's have a look what we are going to do today. Rather simple scene again. So obviously we are taking a look at the particle system and how it works, a little bit at least. And then we are going to render that using Octane. So when we render that and then skip forward a couple of sections, we can see we have our particles and then also have motion blur, which is very nice. Also, as always, those scenes are going to be available on Patreon. It's not a huge effort to do them, but if you want to save a little bit of time, here you go. Let's build the scene real quick from scratch, so you might be able to learn something, especially if you haven't worked with the new particle system before. If you have, you can jump ahead to the Octane part. So first of all, let's go to simulate and create an emitter here, basic emitter. Then let's turn it by -90 degrees so it faces downward. Also, what I want to do is lift it up by 250 units here. Here we go. Next, I want to change some properties of the emitter. So let's go to the emitter emission and set the rate up to a whopping 10,000 and also set the speed to 0. So I want to have gravity affect the speed, not the initial velocity. Let's check if this is working, and yes, you can see the emitter is now filling up with particles. So to get them pulled down, let's actually add a gravity by going to simulate forces, and you can see all the forces will also work with the emitter. So when we add a gravity, yes, it's working. Now our particles are pulled down. What I want to do though is half that gravity, so they are pulled down a little bit slower. Something like that. Right. Next, what I want to add is our collider body. So let's go and add a platonic here. And I want to round those edges a little bit to make it look nice. So what I'm going to do is go to this menu here and add a bevel by holding down Shift. So when we go to wireframe here and B, you can see we have now this bevel added. I have set it to be solid from default, so I have a preset here. But when we go and make this a little bit wider and then add all of this into a SDS object, then go back to solid view, we have our nice collider body. Let's actually rename it. And then let's make it a collider by right-clicking, go to the simulation tags and get collider here. So when we now play, nothing is happening, and this is a bit of a specialty. With the particles, you need to go to simulate again, then to modifiers, and then add a modifier collider here too. And once we added this, then our collision is working. While we are at it, the collision looks very unnatural or too calculated. Let's actually get in some randomness. So I want to have less bounce, so let's make it 25. And the friction, let's make that also 25. And the random angle, let's make this 50. And let's see. Yeah, that looks much more natural. Nice. As a last sprinkle on top for our simulation, let's go to our SDS platonic here. Right-click, animation, and let's add a Vibrate Tag and then change the angle with it. So let's type in 60 degrees in every one of those fields and then go with 0.5 to make it a little bit slower. And now if we hit play, you can see we get a little bit more randomness since the object is moving. Super nice. Let's actually start looking at Octane. So if we render now, you can see the scene is black. At least for me, dependent on your settings, your scene might be lit by a white environment. But let's make it a little bit more interesting by bringing in a sun. Tilt that 10 degrees here. and then rotate it to, I don't know, I had it at 90 degrees or minus 90 in my setup. Here we go. So we have something like this. Very nice. So now let's hit play and see what's happening, and there's no particles visible in the live viewer here. On older particle systems, what you had to do, and probably this is going to work as well when Ahmed adapts the particle system to the new particles, is go with the Octane object tag here, go to particle rendering and then set it to geometry and then drop in, for example, a sphere in here. So let's create a sphere, make it smaller and then drop it inside of here. And this would have worked in older particle systems, but right now this is not supported. By the way, the new particle system stores all its data in the particle group, so having this tag on the particle emitter wouldn't work in any case, also not with Redshift. So you would have to do that on the particle group actually. But still, this isn't working, so we need to have a workaround, which I'm going to show you next. And it's really simple, so all we need is a cloner object in object mode. So let's go to the cloner, set it to object mode, and then we need to drop in the group. Remember, all the data is stored in the group of the particles. And then, last but not least, we need to get the object that should be cloned onto the particles here. Now, this is a little bit heavy since we are using instances, so all the objects here are real and all the polygons also. So what we can do is, first of all, let's go to the sphere here and make it a little bit smaller, so 5 for example, and also reduce the polygons here. So let's go with 16 polygons. And then the last thing, you would need to do that beforehand, or it's at least advised to do that beforehand. We are going to set this to multi-instance because this is very light on Octane's rendering performance. Okay, let's try this now. And we can see, yes, this is moving and working quite nicely. Also, the updates are quite fast because we are using multi-instances. Let's turn off the cloner again for a second to talk about the size option in the emitter. So if we go to the particle group, under draw, we can display the size here. And if we want to have the size of the sphere match what we have as a particle size, we need to make the sphere a value of 1. So let's turn this on again. And also we need to go to the particle scale here and set this to 100%. So the cloner knows that we want to scale our particles. Let's show this by going to the emitter once more. I think it's in the emitter, and then under radius it's 1 right now. But if we have this with a variance, so 0.75, if we emit now again, you can see now the sphere's radius or the cloner's radius is connected to the emitter scale. And if we wouldn't have done that, then the spheres all would be just 1 unit across. Alright, let's go back and set this to be particle scale again. Here we go. And you can see that is also reflected in Octane. Nice. Let's make the scene more readable by adding some separators here. And then let's actually introduce some color by going to another tool here. So let's go to simulate and then modifiers and then color mapper. So we can map values to colors. So let's go and put that into the particle group. If it's not in there, it will affect all groups. If it's inside the group, it will only affect this group. So what we want to map is actually H percentage. So let's go H percentage, 0 to 100%, and then just leave in those colors. Right now, the particle basically lives forever. What we want to do is go to the emitter and change the particle's life. So what we need to do is go and make this, for example, 60 frames. Let's see if that's working. And yes, you can see now the particle will change the color over its life. But in Octane, this is not happening. So how can we bring in the colors into our particle system in Octane? To get there, the first thing to do is, as always, create a material. So let's create a diffuse material because we are only interested at the color right now. And then what we need to do is, of course, assign that and then go inside of the nodes of this particle material. Here we go. So what we need to do here is define a instance color. This is a shader or a node that you might be familiar with if you're working with X particles. With X particles, you would link your emitter here and then you have access to all this data here. Since this is not implemented with the new particle system, the only data we have access to is the color information. And to get this is to apply it to the color, obviously. And then what we need to do is apply the cloner to the link here, not the particle group. And when we hit play now, we can see, wow, it's working. All of our particles have colors now. Very nice. The last thing I promised here was motion blur, so let's do this. We need a camera for that. Let's look through the camera and add a Octane object tag, of course a camera tag I mean, and then go for the motion blur tab and hit angle, since this is almost always looking correct when you are rendering animations. Also, what you need to do is go to the cloner, not the sphere, the cloner, and set this and get a object tag from Octane on here, because this is giving us the motion blur information on that. So now if we step through the particles here, at least in theory, it should generate motion blur. Maybe you have to start from scratch. Not happening right now, so let's check some settings. Let's go to the camera and actually enable motion blur here. So of course you have to have it enabled in order to work. Alright, we already achieved what we set out to do, but particle systems are rarely that simple. So basically the next section is a bonus gotcha section that I ran into by trying the new particle system and I want to share with you. So let's make this particle system a little bit more complicated by adding the collided particles in a different group. To do so, we need to go to simulate once more, add a particle group, let's move it down here, and then also go to the collider and add it in here. So now if we play, what's happening is everything works until those particles hit the object. Then they are no longer part of our Octane simulation. And this obviously is because we only can link one group per cloner. A possible workaround for this would be to go to the simulate once more and add a multi-group. So let's get this there here. So what we can do is lock that and then drag in all of our groups in here. And then instead of the initial group here, let's go with the multi-group. Here we go. Let's hit play again. And let's see if that's working. And yes, this is working. So now we have our particles behaving like inside of one system, though they are created in separate groups. Though I sometimes noticed I ran into problems, especially with colors. So let's give those particles here a different color scheme by just loading another preset here. Let's go back and re-render. And while this seems to be working quite fine here, when we spawn different particles, so right now every particle just has gotten a different color, but if we spawn new particles on Collusion, for example, we sometimes have glitches. So to avoid those is basically delete the multi-group again and then go for every group and add a cloner to every single group. What I mean by that is add another cloner, call it collider. Then also what we need to do is link the collider in here. And then you can see those colors are not matching. Those particles should be blue. So we also need to duplicate our material, call that collider as well. And last but not least, replace the material tag. And then inside of the material also replace the source with the right object here. And now if we hit play, we can see this is working just great. But of course it has the added complexity of creating more cloners and more materials that all have to be linked to the correct dependency. The next one is quite obvious, so if you don't want to draw your objects in the viewport, you can go to your cloner inside of the multi-instance and then set the viewport mode to off or points. Well, we have already points with the particles, so you don't need to see the points anyway. And therefore, just draw the particles in your viewport, and Octane still draws the object here. So this is even more efficient. Second to last gotcha here, so we have another scene, and I try to make some sparks. Let's actually show you in the picture view how this looks like. So here we go. And then play. So we have something like that. And what I noticed, if we have the camera setting set as before, that the particles basically don't have any directional info when they are born. So we end up, when we are basically, I create new particles on the fly to emit some sparks as it would be in the real world, especially if they hit the floor. You can see whenever we create new particles, those don't have motion blur because they don't have a vector yet. And what we need to do is actually get this camera alignment to after, so they are emitted and already have a vector when they get rendered. So let me show you. I have rendered this already. So now when they create it, they already have a direction and a vector. So they don't look odd when they are created. They don't form those bolts unless they are not moving anyway. So this then is correct. And maybe in the movement you don't see it, but if you are a pixel peeper as I am, then this is a much more satisfying result. Oh, by the way, the scene is also included in my Patreon scenes if you're interested. I'm sure there are a lot more gotchas out there, but this is all I could find in the short time I had. So this is our last one, and what I want to do is cache the scene. So let's go cache scene and actually give it a name here. The cool thing is that the cache is now external. So let's just save and let it run. So far so good, but now if I want to play back our cache, our particles seem to be off now, so let's go outside of the camera here, and we can see, wow, this is 10 times the size as it was before. So if we go to Control D here, we can see our scene is in millimeters, and somehow this doesn't get translated with the cache. So what we need to do is, in the cache emitter, get this down to the original size by 1/10 here, 0.1. Here we go. And then when we render, we can barely see there are particles, but they are also now the 10th of the size. So what we need to do here is also go to the spheres and make them 10 millimeters instead of 1. And now we are back to square one here and can render. And also, of course, the motion blur is working. We are just not inside of the camera. So if we now get this ready, then everything is back to normal. But this is something I really want to point out and needs to be fixed by Maxon. Alright, that's already it. A short one as promised. At least I think so. Let's see what the edit says. I hope you picked up some tricks along the way and learned something. By the way, this is the third tutorial for Cinema 4D in a row. I am aware that I'm neglecting Blender and Cycles a bit. If you have any good ideas for that, let me know in the comments down below. I am eager to do some more tutorials on this side. And now, without further ado, let's thank those people who made this video possible. Of course, my Patreons. Especially my €50 tier subscribers, Shields Augustinen, Just a Freakin', and Leon Studio TV. Also, of course, a huge thank you for my €15 tier subscribers, Render King, Alessandro Bonchio, Alessio De Vecchi, Bavana, BVR, Chris Fritchie, Christian Grajewski, Erbe Plus Academy, George Luna, Graham Bagnall, Harish Pavaskar, Joel Mackimer, John Edward, Chris Clemson, Ludger, Muradan Axos, Nico Straub, Part 1 of 2, Kuok An Dang, Raiko, Renato Marquez, Reshock, Shamus Johnson, Shiro 2049, Tagori M. Vilela, Terry Wayne Ranson, Touch My Render, Yasin Rupp, and Shibue Xiang. Thank you all so very much for making it possible to produce those videos that you all enjoy. Welcome to the after show of The Sparks. As always, if you're still watching and listening, thank you so very much for sticking this long. Initially, I was afraid that this wasn't enough for a tutorial, so I prepared another bonus. This would have been slicing a volume by a shader. Maybe this would be a nice tutorial on its own, I don't know. Also, again, this was a request from a colleague of mine. I really love those because I always have ideas to do tutorials after hearing them. Again, if you want to share your support, let's post some sparkles in the comments down below. And that leaves me with wishing you a great start into the week, a fantastic week, and a good time. And happy sparkling. Bye.